sitting here in London with Alex, which people don't know. He's written this amazing book called No Bullshit Strategy. And you can see as often when I really get into books, as you know, in the audience out there, I really gone into this book. And I'm actually using it. I'm actually doing the implementation in the end, which we're going to talk about there today. We're going to talk about strategy. And lots of people talk about strategy, but do they actually, as Alex say, understand what strategy is? And do they actually know how to implement it? And Alex has a different take on this than I've learned back in my corporate career, where I found out actually lots of what we're doing was setting goals, as Alex said, and then we put them in beautiful spreadsheets of beautiful presentations, and in principle, some of it was executed, but did it actually feed up to the real vision and mission of the business, or the strategy, as you say, is actually more important than the purpose as well. We'll come back into all of that. But thank you for joining the show. I'm sure that the audience out there is going to have some reflections after our conversation about their abilities and thoughts around strategy.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. If I can convince you you've got a problem, then I've done my job.
How did you, Alex, get to the position of, working with founders, CEOs, developing, as you call them, no bullshit strategies?
Well, it all came really from my profound ignorance about the strategy field. Weirdly enough, I was working in a marketing agency before, a small marketing agency who didn't do any strategy. Obviously, there are a lot of agencies out there who talk a big game about strategy in whatever they mean by strategy, but this wasn't one of them. But over time, I realized that like some agencies, they use the word strategy, and they have people in the business who are dedicated to strategy. And so I said to the boss of the agency, well, why don't you just let me do that? Because then, it'll sound good, and something's better than nothing. And the fact that I don't know what I'm talking about, what difference does that make? Because one of the beauties of that whole field is that no one knows what they're talking about. So whatever you say is true is true. So I just kind of basically made up what I thought was sort of strategic within the world of a marketing agency. But what I started to realize over time, and I think anyone who's worked in the agency land will be familiar with this, is that when you get clients come to you, your job always is basically to put lipstick on the pig. The implicit brief that everyone gives you is essentially along the lines of, here's our product, here's our thing, which isn't actually that appealing and doesn't have that much market traction. And we want you to spin it in a way to make it look more appealing than it really is. And at the end of the day, that's the role of any sort of creative marketing. And if it wasn't, why would you need any creativity? The purpose of the creativity is to sort of fake desirability and differentiation.
Yeah.
But now and again, you'll get a client come along who the thing that they're selling and the way that their business is set up, it's so sort of well thought through, so unique, so clear, so compelling that the agency doesn't have to do anything clever to sell that thing. They don't have to do anything clever to make people want it. And in that scenario, the agency just becomes like a messenger boy. They don't need to do it. They don't need to do any sort of quote unquote strategic or creative thinking in particular, because that's already baked in to the client's business. So I would say that, maybe like 1 in 20, 1 in 15 clients that would come through the agency's doors, were like this. And you'd look at them and you'd say, damn, that's like really good. We don't need to spin this. And after a while, I thought to myself, well, it'd be really interesting to, instead of putting lipstick on the pig and trying to make these mediocre businesses look like great businesses, I'd actually quite like to just work on the pig itself, so to speak, and actually help the mediocre businesses be great businesses, not just look like great businesses. And so essentially I went out into the world with all these theories on how you could do that, and I started trying to sell them to clients. Now, little did I know that all along what I was doing was strategy. But because bear in mind that I was coming from a background and a world where there was no discussion or conception of strategy, I didn't know that this is what I was doing. So I spent like 4 or 5 years doing this and doing it sort of moderately successfully before I realized that this is just like strategy, which if you worked for like a McKinsey or whoever, you would or if you'd read books like good strategy, bad strategy,
Yeah.
or blue ocean strategy,
Yeah.
or whatever, you would instantly realize that this is just like a well-established academic and business field. But here I was thinking that I was doing this completely original thing, and I come up with all these new ideas, and aren't I smart, and blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, oh, no, actually, pretty much everything I think has already been written down and codified and discovered, not just like 5 years ago, but like 50 years ago. And so that's how I found myself in this situation. But it wasn't so bad, because the advantage that this gave me is because I was making all this stuff up. But obviously the concepts that I was groping at, like, they were universal principles. They're not like, nobody invents what makes a good business. What makes a good business is sort of fixed in time.
Yeah.
You can articulate it differently, but truth is the truth.
Yeah.
So all the things that I was talking about, they may be the same things that the strategy industry was talking about, but I was doing it with different language. And because I was doing it with different language, it connected with a different group of people. And what you find with strategy is that when you go below a kind of 500 million turnover business, understanding of basic strategic precepts, it just vanishes.
Yeah.
It's not like they're doing it badly. They're just not doing it at all. And frankly, a lot of multi-billion dollar businesses aren't really doing it either, but at least they have the resources to give it a go.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that my way of talking about these universal principles just had more cut through for these kind of, not even small founders, yes, them too, but like sort of mid-size, even quite large founders. And so it sort of opened up this world to a whole new group of people. And that's why I wrote the book. And now that's what I do with all my stuff online, is just to basically make every founder, every chief executive out there realize, listen, here are some basic strategic precepts that if you apply them to your business, it's going to perform far, far, far better. But at the moment, you're completely unaware of them and not even engaging with them.
Yeah, because actually, as I was reading your book, I was thinking back the first time as a blue ocean strategy book, Bad and Good Strategy, which is also on the bookshelves at home. But I probably read them once, and I was thinking back on my business school days where it has, I think it was called Corporate Strategy, and then you had Michael Porter's
Michael
stuff,
Porter, love him.
all that stuff, which is quite quite heavy stuff, and not something every founder would read if they hadn't been through a traditional business school and so on. So I really love the thing where you talked about a different language, and actually I think that's really what make it work so well when you then work with the concept through the book. But let's go into it. What is the big problems you help these founders? Because you already, you were touching a bit on helping these founders, CEOs, and in smaller businesses than big corporates.
Let's just think about what the average life is like for a given business. And actually, big and small, like every business on the planet, they're actually all experiencing, broadly speaking, the same things. Because if we want to really take it back to first principles, every single business on the planet is just at the mercy of supply and demand.
Yeah.
And so what you're going to find is, with some very rare exceptions, every business either has a supply problem or it has a demand problem. And what I mean by that is, a supply problem means that, fine, you are doing something that people want, something coherent and something sellable, but the supply of it is too great because there are loads of other competitors out there who are also supplying that thing. And so you then have difficulty, because how do you get the customer to choose you instead of all the other similar options? So that's what I would call a business who's facing a supply problem, as in the supply is too much.
Yeah.
Then there's another group of businesses who have a demand problem. There's fewer of them, maybe like 20, 30%. And these businesses, they're ones who typically, they're doing something quite unique and quite different. So they can say, hey, there's no one else who does what we do. But they go from out of the frying pan into the fire, because as soon as you do that, what you generally find is that the reason no one else is doing what you do is because the market doesn't want it, or the market doesn't understand it. So you get a lot of businesses out there who are doing something genuinely unique, but they find it hard to stimulate demand. So those are businesses with a demand problem. Now, I think anybody listening to this can probably instantly put their business into one of those two buckets. Hopefully not both, but I suppose that's possible too. Now, both of these are just symptoms of a business that has got bad strategy, that hasn't figured out the place that it fits in the market and fundamentally what it's for. And what do businesses like that experience? Well, the ones with the supply problem, they basically experience commodification. They have to compete on price. They have to spend a lot of money on marketing. They have to basically hustle and try and work and do everything they can to inch ahead of their competition. And it's a real attritional battle that they have. And that, I think, is the normal way of being for most businesses. The normal way of being for most businesses is to sit there thinking, how can we stimulate how can we stimulate preference for us? And that's why they go to a marketing agency like who I worked with before. This is one of many things that you can do to create artificial differentiation and artificial preference. The businesses who have got the demand problem, they actually are in a worse place because basically they have a race against time whereby you either convince the market that this thing you're selling is worthwhile and that they want it, or you die. The good thing about the former businesses, the businesses with the supply problem, they tend not to die because you can hustle your way to survival, a mediocre form of survival. You'll probably be fine. If you're a smart, competent person, you'll probably be fine with one of those type of businesses. With the businesses who have the demand problem because the market just doesn't get them, after a while they just die. So that's actually the worst position to be in. But both of these situations are solved when you actually develop a strategy, when you develop an understanding of what the unique value is that your business exists to put out into the market. When you can answer that question, when you've sussed that out, when you have figured out something which you know has got low supply, you're the only one doing it, and high demand, people want it, well, then you win. And I mean, just think about it. Like if I gave you right now a business and said, this business sells something that everybody wants and they can't get it anywhere else but this business, how hard would it be to run that business? It would
definitely be easier than the two others you just mentioned.
Exactly. Well, people, it's funny because people sweat over a lot of do we have a good culture and does the business run well and all these sort of quality metrics. But the sad truth is that out there are businesses which are crap on every single metric, except they're selling something which people want and they can't get anywhere else. And those businesses are making money even though the business is crap. So, that is the silver bullet, but not many companies get there.
I mean, coming in a moment, we'll talk a bit about what is then a no bullshit strategy. But actually, it's quite interesting. So we done some research we did over the pandemic. We came to, there was when we listened back and we talked more with these founders, CEO who was Mavericks in the hospitality and food industry. There was 7 tenets, and the first tenet was clarity of direction and purpose. And direction for me is strategy, because it doesn't really matter what purpose you have if you don't have a business model that generate cash in a way.
Yeah.
And that fits really well with what you just explained as well. What is then a no bullshit strategy when you hit that straight in the target, the bullseyes of a strategy, and you just know that makes us different? That's where we stand out as a company. We're not in one of those two camps. You just described, the frying pan or nobody that really doesn't care.
Yeah. So like I say, the easiest way to think about strategy is to think about it as being identification of the unique value that your business produces. Now, all any business is ever doing is just exchanging one form of value for another. You're exchanging the value that you generate through your operations for another form of value, cash. And that's the way it works. So the more value that you can create on your end, the more value you'll be able to collect from the customer. So everything that you're doing is focused on how can we generate that value and how can we make it unique so that we don't have that supply problem. So essentially what every business needs to do, and the thing that all the founders should be thinking about all day and every day, is what is that thing that people are prepared to pay for, which only we deliver. And if you can't just answer what that thing is straight away, well, that explains essentially all of your problems. And that's kind of like the absence of strategy. Now, of course, like, sometimes people will, there are so many mistakes that people make with this, because a lot of people will say, oh, of course I know what it is. And then they'll say something, but there are a lot of caveats that you have to work with here. So, for example, one error that people will make is that they think about their unique value as being to do with them being better than their competitors. Mm-hmm. So this is hospitality podcast, so let's think about like a restaurant. So the basic answer, restaurant will say, oh, well, we have the best food.
Yeah.
Okay. But like, think about that word unique. The idea of best, it's not a difference in kind, it's a different in degree. So like great food and crap food are actually, they're the same thing. They're just on the continuum. And the market, it doesn't recognize degrees of quality for the most part. It only recognizes difference. So if you are trying to win based on being better than your competitors, that almost never works, because the market, it can't really perceive betterness. It reads betterness as being the same. And even think about it from a customer's point of view. If everyone's telling you that they're the best, who are you meant to believe? Because everyone's going to claim that they're good. It might be good for the return purchase, but it's not good for the first purchase. So you need to think about it more in terms of what are you don't think of yourself as being the best. Think of yourself as being the only. What is something that only you offer? So quality of food can't be it, because even if you are 10% better than your competitor, well, their food's still quality as well. So there's no uniqueness there. So this is the first place that people tend to fall down. They think they're going to win by just outstripping their competitors on the same metrics, whereas really the game is to find an entirely new form of value, an entirely different metric to compete on.
Could quality be part of that metric? Is it a number of things, or is it normally just a specific thing that makes you different?
Well, the quality, look, there is the odd occasion where a business can win on quality, but that would only exist in a situation where all of the competition are genuinely awful. And in this day and age, there aren't many industries where that's true. The energy industry, incidentally, in the UK, that is true. And that's why Octopus Energy are doing so well, because the customer service standards of their competitors are so terrible that they can win by just having decent customer service. That's very unusual. That normally doesn't happen, because normally businesses in any given industry are quite competent. So you have to like add something new to the game. But if you think in terms of quality, the right quality for any business to have with its product or service is not high quality. It's the appropriate level of quality to answer the strategy that you have identified. So, we talked before about Starbucks. And we think about like Starbucks doesn't have the best coffee in the world, but it became the most successful coffee chain in the world. Now, some people would look at that and they would say, well, hang on, how can it be that the company that doesn't have the best coffee becomes the biggest coffee chain in the world? Well, that's because they were not competing on a metric of who has the best coffee, because that's a commodity competition. That's better. It doesn't work. They introduced an entirely new form of value to that market, which now we're all very familiar with. But at the time, it was very radical, where they were like, okay, well, never mind about the coffee. The coffee is just like, fine, we have to have coffee, whatever. What we're about is creating this third space between work and home, where people can basically come and hang out and do work all day. We'll let them stay in the coffee shop all day, even if they only order one cup of coffee. And it was really like all the value they provided was on how they handled the space. The coffee, it just needed to be effectively sort of good enough to be seen as kind of like mass premium. It couldn't be crap, because that would sort of probably undermine the strategy they were trying to do. But after a certain point, it would have been self-defeating to make the coffee any better. So they got it in just the right spot commercially to make that strategy work. And again, if we think about like Ryanair or something like that, like Ryanair's strategy is to have a bad product. I mean, there's more to it than that, but the quality, the appropriate quality for what they're trying to do is a very, very low quality. They almost like cultivate a poor product. So you see this like whole notion of quality, which a lot of industries, and I'm sure the hospitality industry in particular, is very like infested with this idea of good quality is good, bad quality is bad. Yeah. But there is no good or bad strategically. All there is the right solution to fit that market gap that you've identified and that you're meant to be going after.
It's quite interesting when you sit in senior places, and especially in the hospitality sector. And you're absolutely right. There's a big confusion about what is the value, because we talk about quality, standard of service, standard of cleanliness, which is a commodity thing. Everybody can compete you out of that in a way, and very few actually get created that. Starbucks created the third space. I think everybody knows Dishoom that's listening in as well. They also created something around their space and curation of that, where there's some value exchange. It's not really on those parameters. They fight the battle. How do we then, what is the steps so that when people listening, okay, they say, wow, okay, I'm actually fighting on a commodity thing, my strategy. How do we actually then go about in the process of defining that value strategy that actually you need to deliver to the market that's so different from others?
Yeah. So there are a few different techniques that you can use. So one, to give you, I mean, this isn't often the solution, but it's like a nice, simple way of thinking about it. One very simple technique is to just think about finding new forms of value that don't currently exist in your category, but do exist in other categories. So every category has got what we might call a sort of core set of value offerings. So like 3 or 4 things which all the brands in there compete over and which everyone thinks are very important. So like if you're talking about, I don't know, laundry detergent, it needs to get your whites white.
Yeah.
Right. So like that would just be a sort of core thing in there. Or like chocolate has to taste good, or like a hotel needs to have good service or be clean or whatever.
Yeah.
So all of these things, they basically tell you what the battleground is in that category. And basically they also tell you, here are things where you will never win because they're hygiene factors, right? They're just like, they have to be done potentially. But like you'll never get leverage because they're what everyone's fighting over. So one very simple way of doing it is to think about, okay, well, what is a form of value which does not exist in this category right now? So I mean, this just dropped into my mind just now. So it's a silly example, but I was groping for groping, you'll see is the wrong word here. I was groping for a hospitality example, but it's like, okay, so one thing that hospitality generally isn't, well, mass hospitality anyway, is sexy.
Yeah.
But then what did Hooters do? Okay, Hooters, I guess they're probably not even in business now or whatever, or they're different. But obviously, this was a very big, very successful, very differentiated restaurant proposition for a long, long time, because they basically imported a sort of value offering which is not recognized or not normally delivered in their category, but but you could find a lot of other categories where it is present, like in fashion or like, I don't know, publishing or whatever. And you say, oh, well, we could just bring that to this category. New value offering, simple as that, right? So this is a very, very simple way of looking at it. You could actually even play like a game where AI is quite good at this. You could say to AI, right, list all the standard value offerings in my category, and it will just go digga, and it will put out, make your whites white, whatever. Then you say, all right, now list all the standard value offerings in, and just think of a completely random category, like automotive or like accountancy firms or something like that. And it'll go digga. And you say, now I want you to take each of the value offerings from like the automotive sector, and I want you to overlay them on my category and explain what a business that delivered that in my category might look like. And then digga is going to come up with a whole bunch of like quite sort of, I mean, they might not be good ideas, but they're going to be quite original ideas. Yeah. Like, are they good strategies? I don't know. But are they strategies? Yes. Which is already ahead of probably what most people are doing already. So that's like a very like basic way that you can imagine playing the game. A more sophisticated way of playing the game, and this is actually where you're more working with a pre-existing business. Because what I just said there, that's a little bit like coming up with the blue sky idea. But the fact of the matter is, if you've already got a business, you're somewhat restricted to the realities of your business as it is now.
Yeah.
So really, you don't want to just do this blue sky thing and impose it on your business. That's probably not going to work. You actually have to lean in to the unique qualities and tendencies that your business has. And every single business has got unique qualities and tendencies to it. And a lot of the time, the founder of the business is completely oblivious to what these things are because they're things that they didn't intend when they set it up. They're things that accidentally unfolded. So the way that you do that in a more sophisticated way is that great strategies aren't just about bolting on a new form of value in the category. The best strategies actually emerge from sacrifice. And what that means is that it's when you take something which your competitors think is important, some form of value offering, and you decide, you know what, not only are we not going to offer this, but we're actually going to go against this. And when we remove this thing, that actually suddenly opens up a new vista of possibilities for us to execute, which weren't possible when we were doing this thing. So like very basic example of this, just to sort of get you in the headspace, is like the low-cost airlines category was created by Southwest Airlines being the first airline to have the idea of, hey, what if we stop serving business travelers and we remove business class and everything associated with business travelers, which none of the other airlines had even considered that's a possibility because they're just like, well, it's very important that we do business travel. Of course it is, because there's a lot of money in that. Yeah. But when they saw, well, if we just remove this crucial, supposedly ingredient, woof, look at this whole new universe that we've just opened up, which was completely invisible to our competitors because they were so locked into the assumption that this is how things are done. Again, in the hospitality world, I don't know too much about this case study. Again, it's just something that springs to mind. Like Nando's is an absolute phenomenon as a business. Nando's made a lot of very counterintuitive strategic sacrifices. Like again, people in the hospitality world know much better than me. I'm just saying this as a punter, things I've noticed. You know, I know that there are a lot of restaurants who do this now, but there was a time when the notion that you have to go up an order, but then you get waiters bringing you the food. So it's not fast food, but it's not like proper restaurant either. Like there was a time when that was a real like weird innovation, but that opens up a whole bunch of different value possibilities, which pure fast food like McDonald's can't do, and which a proper restaurant can't do either. So, also, like with Nando's, you might say something very basic like, well, they decided to focus in on effectively just one ingredient, chicken. Yeah. And what benefits does it accrue them there to actually say, you know what, I know that they probably do have one vegetarian option, but it's pretty like, they're pretty limited on that. There's no beef or like there's no other forms of meat other than chicken. You see, all of these things are like sacrifices, which then which your average restaurant would think, oh, well, we couldn't do that. That would be silly. Yeah. But actually, it's not silly. So if you then look at your business, what you're going to find is that your business, it already sucks in certain ways, right? There are already things where you're not doing very well or where you're not being chosen or where you don't have any leverage. And what I would say, and you need to get very honest about those things. And that's one of the first places that founders have got a lot of problems because they don't want to admit that their business is shit. But it is shit. Every business has got areas where it's shit. The second that you recognize what those are, then you're empowered because you could say, well, look, what if we just stop doing this thing altogether? Yeah. What would that look like? And then suddenly that you have the potential for innovation opens up.
And you talked about just before a bit about going against the status quo, going against the established way of doing in the industry. Are you thinking about there, there's a lot of businesses starts out where, they want to be a challenger brand or they want to be a really purpose-driven brand that want to set a new agenda. So they start educating the market. Is that a strategy or?
I mean, I'm just thinking, again, this isn't such an issue now, but it probably still exists. There was this time when, so people have this idea of challenger brand, which let's be clear what challenger brand means. Challenger brand just means challenging the status quo. And a lot of, so whatever the status quo is, the opposite of that is a challenger brand. The problem is that a lot of people have somehow got it in their head that a challenger brand is not a brand that challenges the status quo. It's a brand that is, in some sense, ethical, right? Now, I'm sorry, but ethics have been the status quo for about 15 years. Like a brand like Innocent or someone like that, they're like the heart of the market. They're not outliers anymore.
Yeah.
So what does a challenger brand look like in FMCG now? Well, actually, it looks like the opposite of Innocent. It looks like Liquid Death. It looks like a brand that basically says, fuck you. Because being nice is not challenger. Being nice is the status quo. I'm not saying that everyone should like create Liquid Death type brands. I'm just saying that like what a challenger brand is changes based on what the status quo is. But I see a lot of businesses out there, definitely in FMCG, maybe in hospitality too, who have this idea that like, well, oh, if we're good for the environment or if we're like vegan or something like that, then we're a challenger brand. You're not, because that is and has been the status quo for a long time. And people, they like to create a lot of businesses in that sort of purposeful space, they like to create a straw man to go after. They like to pretend that their heart of their category is some evil, unhealthy, sort of capitalist pig kind of thing that they can attack in a heroic way. But unfortunately, that's very rarely the case these days, because the big boys, the Unilevers and the Procter & Gambles and people like that are falling over themselves backwards to be all sort of nice and purposeful and all the rest of it. So I think that there's a huge trap for a lot of businesses to think that some form of purposefulness is going to be an effective strategy. And it has another problem with it as well, which is a little bit of a technical problem, but I'll try and explain it simply, which is that all customers, and I don't care what the category is and I don't care what the brand is, all customers of any business only care about one thing, and that's themselves. People do not buy things because they have some bigger altruistic purpose. Now, sometimes it appears that that's the case, but it's an optical illusion. If we take someone like Patagonia, very sort of purposeful brand, and so there's this sort of illusion that people buy Patagonia because they're trying to do right by the planet. That's a rationalization that Patagonia offers people, which is a sort of cover for what people really want, which is the various sort of status rewards and the look of the clothes and the perceived lifestyle that goes along with Patagonia. You know, like any fashion brand with Patagonia, you're buying a particular image of yourself, which you wear this and then you want people to think that you're like that type of person. You're not doing it because when I buy that jacket, it's going to save the rainforest, because we all know that if you really want to save the rainforest, and Yves Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, says this himself, don't buy any jacket at all. You know,
buy less.
Exactly. Patagonia themselves say every item we create is bad for the environment, because anything is bad for the environment if you're going to look at it that way. So every single strategy, every single value offering, it needs to be built around selfish desire. Now, this doesn't mean that companies shouldn't have high-minded purposes, but you have to recognize that the high-minded purpose of your business, you know, saving the rainforest, whatever, that's very effective for motivating your team, for speaking to the press, for getting investors. It's very effective form of communication for everybody except your customer. Because your customer, they've got more important things in their life than to think about your business. When they're engaging with your business, they're just thinking, what's in it for me? Not what's in it for the world. So the great purposeful businesses, what they manage to do is they have this sort of double story approach. I sometimes talk about this as the two-story approach, where you have a customer story, which is a way of framing what you do from the customer's point of view, where the customer is the protagonist and it's 100% built around the customer's selfish desires and nothing else. And then you have the company story, which is a story where the company is the protagonist, where you can talk more about your big vision and what you want to change in the world and stuff like that. Take your company story to investors and to your team and new hires and stuff like that. Take your customer story to the customer, and don't let these things cross. But what you see with a lot of those purposeful brands, just to close the loop, is they take the company story, we're all about this big vision, and then they think that people are going to buy from them because of that, but they're not, because the customer is thinking subconsciously, well, who gives a shit? What's in it for me?
Yeah. And I guess also they can't grasp it sometimes. It's just too much in their very few seconds of making a choice.
Yes, 100%.
It's like choosing
100%.
a food, choosing a restaurant, it's like something that goes very fast in a way. It's not like very thoughtful buying process. It's not like buying a car, a Tesla, for example.
No, exactly. And that's another thing. That's another good point.
It's not exciting, maybe. It's not sexy.
Exactly. It's a really good way of thinking about it, what you've said just there, which is that the degree to which you can pull purpose and bigger vision into your customer marketing is essentially determined by how interested people are in your category and about how much time they're going to dedicate to thinking about it. So a car, to use your example, has got a lot more ability to do this because it's such a big purchase and it's such an interesting purchase than, let's say, a bleach.
Yeah,
because no one gives a crap about their household bleach. More or less, they just sort of like they'll just buy. It's a 2-second purchase rather than a 2-month purchase.
Yeah.
So you need to know where you sit on that interest spectrum, and that essentially dictates how much leeway you have to indulge your flights of fancy.
And it's quite interesting because I've been through this process. I was reading your book in the business I'm involved in, and suddenly we thought we're so interesting for the consumer, but we're not. We are boring. We like boring purchases. Like we fulfill hunger in principle in that moment, and we are a choice between millions of other commodities. And that's really where also when you have the restaurant choice or the hotel choice, how do you actually stand out in that and actually make sure that people feel value? I was actually at a meeting earlier in a place. I think they actually have found a way. It's M Hotels. I don't even know them.
M Hotels, yeah.
They found a way of giving value or make it a special place, and they have membership and special type of group of people that come in there. And they also say we don't want the standard tourist traveler. We want this, explorer and founder business person to join our hotels.
Yeah, M Hotels. I mean, I don't actually know. I don't know exactly what it is about them, but I sort of, even from just like a casual glance, that is a good example of a hotel chain that is really playing a strategic game and is profiting from it because, I haven't unpacked exactly what they're doing, but what they're doing is clearly different. They're playing a different game and, and you're either into that or you're not into that.
Yeah, and I like to be in that environment. It makes me feel, as you said before with Patagonia, it makes me feel that I'm part of something. This is my way of being as an individual. Could you mention a couple of other hospitality business, maybe UK-based, where you think they have, in your view from the outside, when you look at them, there's somebody there that has nailed their strategy and they live it? UK-based ones.
You
talk about an interesting in the book, if I can give you a bit of a nudge.
Nudge me, yeah.
Because I was like, really, I hadn't thought about it that way. And I thought I was like Domino's. You talk about Domino's.
Oh, Domino's Pizza, yeah.
That's like people laugh a bit at that business, but it's a huge business. And they don't see themselves as a pizza business or a restaurant business.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we take any one of these big hospitality brands like Domino's, McDonald's, and we go back historically, now they're very much part of the furniture and you take them for granted.
Yeah.
And a lot of their innovations have become the norm.
Yeah.
But you need to think about how radical what they did was to begin with. And Domino's, obviously, they kind of pioneered the idea of delivering pizza. And again, you need to just imagine a world where pizza wasn't delivered and how big a deal it would have been when pizza started being delivered. And actually, I'm going to get this wrong because I can't remember the precise details, but it'll give the gist. Going back to what I was saying before about kind of your inherent weaknesses driving your strategic advantage, I think when Domino's started, essentially what I think their first thing, it was a pizza restaurant, a normal pizza restaurant, but it was on some sort of industrial estate, I think. And something happened whereby they basically ended up having no space. And so they cut a hole in the wall and they started serving the pizza out of a hole in the wall. So again, we would now be very familiar with the idea of like a food truck or something, but this was before there were food trucks. So very, very radical. And they only did that because they had such a crap restaurant venue. They didn't do that because they were so clever. They were just like, well, we need to find another way of like putting the pizza out the door. And then it wasn't a big leap from that to the delivery and realizing, well, actually, why don't we just make our restaurant just a kitchen with no capability to sit down, and then people can just eat the pizza wherever. And of course, again, that's an advantage of pizza as a food because you eat it with your hand and it's very portable. So you can see how they pull on these threads from being a normal pizza restaurant into creating this incredibly radical thing through leaning into their weaknesses and through making strategic sacrifices. And then now the thing I mentioned in the book, which isn't about that part of it, it's what they do today. And this is a little bit closer to what I was saying before about bringing new forms of value into the category by copying other categories.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they did this on purpose. They might not have, but it doesn't really matter whether they did it on purpose or not. It still is true. If you look at Domino's logo and you think about it in the context of pizza, what you notice is that it's a very, very weird logo because if you look at every other pizza brand on the planet, pretty much, they basically try to look Italian.
Yeah.
Maybe in some cases Chicago with the Chicago deep dish pizzas, but most other pizzas Italian. And they try to bring this vibe of, like Mama used to make, and this is authentic
quality
Italian pizza, blah, 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 which is all in that quality universe. Yeah. You look at Domino's and it doesn't look anything like that. And you think, well, that's a bit weird because it's just so not pizza-ish. What does it look like? And if you know your logos and you know your semiotics, what Domino's logo actually looks like is a delivery company. It looks a lot like FedEx's logo or any one of those big sort of like delivery companies. So what does that subconsciously communicate? It doesn't communicate this is good pizza because like we said before, it isn't good pizza. The pizza's only as good as the pizza needs to be. What it communicates is fast delivery. Yep. And everything about Domino's is about delivery efficiency. Domino's value offering is the same as FedEx's value offering. They're just doing it with in a different category with a different kind of like product. But if you think about it in terms of value, what you're getting is the same, which is hyper reliability and hyper speed when it comes to delivery. And that is why Domino's is what, in my opinion anyway, that is why Domino's looks like a delivery company. So it's like top to bottom strategic genius. And this is why Domino's is worth quite a lot more than your nice, beautiful pizza restaurant in Brixton that's got one location.
And that's also where, when you get very clear on the strategy, I actually wanted to put that in before, especially where it goes wrong as you scale restaurants, as I've done myself, is that you're actually not clear about the strategy. What was your competitive advance? What was your value different from others? And therefore, as you scale, it becomes harder and harder and harder. Nobody understands what you're doing. And that actually leads us to the next thing. How do we actually then create this strategy? Because you have a different approach than, normally you have strategy meetings, PowerPoints, blah, 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 blah. You create all this stuff and it goes in the drawer and nobody actually sees it. Or it maybe comes up once in a while.
Yeah, but a lot of that problem obviously comes from something that you mentioned at the outset, which is this tendency of businesses to confuse strategy with goals. And you get businesses who say something like, our strategy is to, become number one in our category by 2030 or something like that. And you're like that isn't a strategy. The strategy would be how you're going to do that. So nothing wrong with having a goal, but like the goal is not the strategy. The strategy is how you're going to do that. But you actually don't then necessarily have a compelling solution to achieve that thing. Now, the reason these strategies then get ignored, obviously, is because there's no substance to them. Because if I'm working in that business, I don't need to know that. I mean, it might be nice. Maybe we have an away day and everyone's like, yeah, that would be great. But like, there's no practical value in that to me if I'm working in that business, because you haven't actually given me a solution. All you've given me is a problem. Think about it this way. If you give your team a goal, it's a very selfish thing to do, because if you give your team a big goal, what you're basically saying is, guys, here's what I want to have happen, but I don't know how we're going to do that, so you just figure that out. It's like the opposite of leadership, right? Now, what a strategy looks like is a very specific instruction of, we are going to do this thing and this thing and this thing. And that is, we take like the Domino's thing, so back in the day they could have said we're gonna stop serving people on premises completely. We're gonna go into a kitchen only place. We are going to obviously deliver pizza. And I think they also had a whole thing. It was where they really got huge was when they developed their, if you don't get it within 30 minutes, it's free. Proposition. So they had to do all sorts of obviously delivery efficiencies to be able to live up to that promise, whatever. So you see how these are very hard, binary, clear instructions to the business, which ladder up to the overall sort of speedy delivery value offering that they're trying to give. So if you have a strategy like this, which is like a set of instructions, then obviously this is very easy for your team to understand and for them to execute. So what I propose you do when you have a strategy, what a strategy should look like, is you need to write it down essentially as an argument. If you want people to really own the strategy in the business, it's not enough to just say our strategy is speedy delivery, something like that. You actually need to give them the rationale. And the rationale, it always takes the shape of a bit of a kind of story. And the shape of the story is always going to be something like, we're a business that plays in such and such a category. Now, the problem with this category is, and then you name something about the status quo that you don't like. So here's an issue with this category. This issue is giving problems, some form of like problem to our customers in whatever way. But what we've noticed, and this is where you then bring in your sort of new idea, your new way of thinking, is like, so in the case of Domino's, it might be, you know what? We don't actually need to serve people food on premises at all. Or in the case of Southwest Airlines, it might be, actually business travel, we don't have to have business travel. Or in the case of Starbucks, it might be like, how would they sort of frame that in that third in that third space thing? It might be like, what if people were able to stay in the premises long after they've finished their coffee? What would that? Why couldn't we do that? Then you drop like, so therefore we're going to do this thing, and the value that's going to create for the customer is such and such. So you see how you got this whole argument, a bit like a lawyer laying out their case. When you tell your business this story, and you can write it up as an essay, that's what I encourage you to do. Don't do like a PowerPoint deck, actually just write it like as a sort of piece of prose. Then people will be able to internalize the story much better than they can internalize, a sort of pyramid or something on a PowerPoint, and then they'll be able to understand how they fit into that, and they'll be able to understand basically the game this business is trying to play. If you want to see a real life example of this, which is it's just so perfect and pure that it's just like it just tells you everything about what a strategy should look like. You can Google Tesla's secret master plan, which is a blog post that Elon Musk wrote in 2006 before the first Tesla was even launched. And the first 3 or 4 paragraphs is just like the strategy of Tesla. And that entire didn't only build $1 billion brand, it built an entire industry, electric vehicles. Those 3 or 4 paragraphs say everything about what they realized, what the game of that business is, and what they were going to do. And there's not a single number in there. There's not a single piece of research. It's just him basically saying, I've noticed this thing. I reckon if we did this thing, that would work because of this reason. So let's do it. And that's all a strategy is. It's just like, hey, I reckon that if we did this, this would result in this thing because of XYZ reasons. You don't need to get any more complicated than that. If 4 paragraphs of a blog post was enough to build like $1 trillion industry or whatever the EVs are today, then I think it's enough for your your burrito van, right? So and so people they tie themselves up so much in knots about getting over sophisticated with this thing. But at the end of the day, you're just kind of like making a bet on, hey, if we did this, wouldn't that be cool? Maybe that would work. Obviously, you've got to have a rationale, but that's pretty much all it comes down to.
Yeah, and then it becomes like this live document. As you go out on that journey, you might not, that's my own experience as been doing this now for like 5
Yes,
months.
that's true. Yeah.
It's like you don't nail it the first time, but then you move away from it and then you come back and then you add to it. It's a bit like writing a manifesto or something for your business. You just keep on adding to it and you become more and more aware. And then you think you start to make decisions from that.
You're completely right. And funnily enough, I've never really thought of it that way, because I tend to think of it, because this is obviously how my projects go. I tend to think of it a little bit more as like, you figure it out, you nail it, and then you get on and do it. And obviously, when I'm doing a project, that's obviously how it has to be, because the project sort of has to end somewhere and have that sense of forward momentum. But yes, in practice, if you're doing this for yourself, yes, it's exactly like that. And if you lay out the document with that structure, like, what's the status quo of the category? Why is this a problem? What have we noticed that nobody else has noticed? What do we think that nobody else thinks? And what are we going to do about it? If you have that skeleton, then yes, you can just go back and keep on filling in those blanks and sort of like adapting them. But at least you're then thinking strategically, because you're thinking in terms of like your reading of the category and your opposition to the status quo. And sorry, if you're just like allow me one little sort of indulgence here, because I think this would be very relevant for people in the hospitality industry. One thing that you'll hear a lot of people say, which I'm very against, is focus on the customer. And, you know, if you just like really focus on the customer and try and serve the customer, then you're going to create a really good business and it's going to fly. That actually isn't true, because if you focus on the customer, what you're basically going to end up doing is you're going to try and serve the customer better and better, and you're going to get into that better trap of just being another commodified, high-quality operator in your space like everyone else. You need to stop looking at the customer and stop thinking about the engagement with the customer. You need to lift your head up, and where you as the business owner should be focusing is not on what's happening with the customer. You should be focusing on what's happening with the industry. Your entire way of thinking needs to be geared towards what is going on in the industry at large and what am I trying to change with my business about that. My team, they can look after the customers, and however we serve the customers is subservient to how am I trying to change this industry? How am I trying to navigate this industry? So look, if you were in the food truck world, let's say, don't completely forget it. Someone's got to think about it, but forget like what you're doing with the customer on an individual basis and do they like the food and all that kind of thing. You need to be thinking about the world of food trucks. How does the food truck industry operate? What does the food truck industry lack? Where are there opportunities? Where are there gaps in the food truck industry? How can you do something that other types of food trucks don't do, which could blow that all apart? So do you see what I mean about how like your focus is industry level, it's not customer level?
It's out of the business and
it's out of the business, yes, and beyond. Sometimes I talk about it in terms of like thinking beyond the business. So you've heard it when people say, don't work in the business, work on the business.
Yeah.
That's actually, I mean, that's good advice, but it's not enough, because like working in the business is you're the person literally there serving the burrito. Working on the business is you're, let's say, thinking, how can I make my burrito truck nicer? Let's like fix it, or let's change the menu, But it's still fundamentally myopic and insular. Working beyond the business is to stop looking at your truck and look out there at the world and think about, what can I do out there and how can I change this, the whole dynamics of this industry? So yeah, don't work in, don't work on, work beyond.
That's quite interesting, just adding a notch. So yeah, you can go to Alex's website. He will give you all the details in the end, and you can download this template that helps you to get you started. And what I've done now is that actually you also recommend that to chat about the business. So avoiding doing workshops and that. And we talked about that a bit earlier. But then now I chat about the business during the week or the strategy in both situation here. And then I make notes. And then once a week, I have an hour with myself actually tomorrow morning. And then I go back in and read it again and add to it. And that's where you become consistency, because one of the things we talk a lot about here on the show is the power of consistency in the business. And that's probably in the McDonald's madness. It's all about consistency, 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, boom. And then suddenly, when you're comfortable enough, you can then start sharing that strategy with people, and they start to put 1% on it. Oh, we haven't thought about it in that way. Have you thought about it in that way? And then it becomes very, very powerful. And of course, as founder, you need to put that initial 90% in.
Well, you're very unusual if you're doing that, and it's exactly the right thing to do, because the strategic way of thinking and sort of opening yourself up to those kind of ideas. You have to break free, obviously, of the kind of the day-to-day grind. So one of the reasons why I recommend chats in the book as like the best tool for developing strategy is because a chat is casual, open-ended. It doesn't have any sort of business formality with it. You're not doing it in your sort of boardroom necessarily. Like, did you watch the TV show Succession?
Yeah.
So I think that's what that show was great on many levels, but one of the ways that it's great is the way that it portrays strategy. Because what you see is that, like, basically Logan Roy, the sort of Rupert Murdoch type character, he will have these big important conversations like on his yacht at 11 p.m. with a whiskey. And that's where he's making the real big thinking, relaxed decisions about the direction of the business. Those directives will then filter down through the business and into the bean counters and the number crunchers, and they'll make sense of all of them. But where is the thinking actually happening? It's happening in those loose, informal environments. So if you aren't giving yourself that, you're not going to get this type of work. I would quite literally say, if you, like, let's say you're a founder team, if there's two of you, like, this is maybe a silly example, like, go on holiday together. Like, book yourself on a weekend break in some beautiful 5-star hotel. Go and drink, go and sit on the beach, and just like, what's going to happen in those 3 days, other than the fact you're going to have a nice time, that the conversations you have there, without even trying, without even like setting an agenda, I'm telling you, that's going to like accelerate your business more than what you could do in 6 months in the operational mode.
A couple of words on implementation. Like, what is your approach to that? Because you also talk about in the book, the last part of the book, and a lot of your content talk a bit about, it's great to develop a great strategy, find the spot, but it all comes down to implementation, action.
Yeah. So the two main things are, the first most important thing by far is the concept of innovation. So, because what I see a lot of people do is they'll sort of half hear what I'm saying. They'll be like, okay, unique value. And then they'll come up with some sort of unique value offering, and they'll say, okay, this is the unique value that we offer in our category. And you're like, okay, cool. But then they won't follow through to actually have some hard physical innovation that you can touch that delivers that unique value. It almost becomes like a promise, but without any kind of follow through. Think about it like this. If you're saying that your business does something new in the category, if you're saying that your business offers something new, it must by definition do something new. You can't have a unique value offer without having a unique business model or operations or something actually physically different about the business. But people, they always fall down here. They talk the game, but then there's nothing that they can point to in the business and say, and the reason that we're the only ones who deliver this is because of this very hard piece of innovation. And I think one of the reasons this happens is because most people, they tend to think that innovation is something that just belongs in the world of tech. Or like that sort of business. Every business on the planet is in the business of innovation. And it could take lots of different forms. Like Nando's decision to put sinks in the restaurant rather than in the toilets so you could go and wash your hands. Yeah. That is innovation, right? McDonald's hardcore assembly line systematization of their burgers. Yeah. That is innovation. Starbucks saying that you won't get kicked out if you only buy one cup of coffee and sit there all day. That is innovation. Starbucks putting plugs so you could plug in your laptop in there. That is innovation. There's so many things, opportunities for innovation, but my God, if your strategy doesn't say, and the innovation is this and this, right, then just put it in the bin. Because ultimately it's that innovation that is actually going to like deliver that thing for the customer, and actually also build genuine differentiation, because it's those points of innovation. Those are the ways that you're actually different. And then the second thing about execution, I think, is basically going, although it's funny because it doesn't sound like execution, but going back to the communication side of things, the customer story and the company story, like the better you get the better you articulate your strategy and turn it into something that people can really get behind and understand and get excited by, the more you're going to see execution naturally start to come in the business. Why do people today still watch on YouTube's? Why do people today still watch on YouTube videos of Steve Jobs talking to his like marketing team or whatever in like 1987? It's because what you see there is a guy who has mastered the story of what his business is doing. And he knows that his responsibility as a leader is he's got no operational responsibilities at all, and you shouldn't have operational responsibilities after a certain point as a leader. Your responsibility is to just purely be a propagandist and to go around your business and keep on saying your strategy, keep on saying your company story until everybody is so sick of it. I think I heard something about, I don't know if this is true or not, or apocryphal, but anyway, you should do it anyway because it's a good idea. I think there was this chief exec who would go around the business with like $5 notes in his pocket, and he would just stop people at random and say, what is our strategy? And if they could answer him correctly, he gave them $5. And he just kept on doing that like for months and months and months until people were like, yes, they could just recite it, they could eat it, they could live it, they could breathe it. And then you're going to start to see the magic happen, because then the strategy and what this business is all about, its reason for being, is going to start to seep into all the little decisions that everyone's making every day. And ultimately, yes, you need to get the ball rolling with 2 or 3 big innovations, like we're going to do this thing, and that's going to deliver on this unique value we're trying to put out there. That's how you start. But where you really win, and if you look at someone like IKEA or Patagonia or any of these like ultimate brands, that's where the strategy has become so internalized that no one even says it anymore. And sort of you or I, we've never worked for IKEA. I certainly haven't. I guess you haven't either. But I could come up with good IKEA ideas for them to do because it's so incredibly obvious what they're doing. So if I, as just some random person outside the business, gets this business, imagine how it is for the people in there. You know, that's why they can be so innovative and so focused and so pure, and they can build this brand that is completely untouchable, because the strategic insights of their founder are running through every single employee like blood in their veins.
And they're timeless, as you mentioned in the book as well, coming back to IKEA or McDonald's or whatever they are, these businesses we know, Southwest Airlines, and they just survive decade after decade because the strategy is timeless.
Yeah, because true value that people want is always timeless. Products are not timeless. The way that you deliver that value is going to change. If Domino's Pizza, if they're trying to get the pizza to you super quick, and then if tomorrow, like commercial drones became a thing, they would obviously switch to commercial drones, right? So Domino's Pizza is not about mopeds or motorbikes or cars, right? That's just how they're doing it. They're about that time to delivery. And so, yes, this can change all the time. But the value, it needs to be completely timeless. And obviously what these businesses like Blockbuster, you know, everyone's like, oh, Blockbuster fell apart. The reason Blockbuster like fell apart, or Kodak or whoever, is because they didn't understand what they were doing in terms of value. They understood what they were doing in terms of product. So like Kodak thinks we make film. They don't think they're thinking in terms of film. They're not thinking in terms of pictures. Pictures can be delivered in millions of different formats and with different technologies, whereas film is just one thing. So it's when you get trapped into understanding your business from a product perspective, then you're super vulnerable.
Absolutely amazing, Alex. Unfortunately, always you run out of time when you're on a good run. But I think we got
That's how it
covered it
goes.
all. What is strategy? How do you develop it? How do you implement it? Where can people go if they want to connect with you, follow you, get the template and so on? What's the best places?
Well, if you go to my website, which is basicarts.org, on there you can subscribe to my newsletter, and that will give you the free strategy template, and then you can start noodling with that, and at least then you're starting to shape your thinking in the right direction, even if the content leaves a bit to be desired. And then from beyond there, there's lots of possibilities. You can like read the book, and then you can obviously get even better at it. And I've also now got this product called the Strategy Shortcut System, which is a kind of online tool plus course plus community where you also can get like feedback from me, where it's much more practical than the book. It's much more kind of like directive, do this, do this, do this, to really suss these things out and to do it with a little bit of like feedback and sort of community of your peers and work through the strategy and then push into execution. So, when I do a proper piece of consulting for a sort of larger business, obviously that can be very expensive. So like, I don't know, let's say $100,000 or something like that. But with the strategy shortcut system, I try to compress all of that into like 4K.
Yeah.
But to get exactly the same output, or as near as damn it the same output. So if you're actually got a business and you're really serious about, I'm going to figure this out, then that would be by far the most kind of efficient way of doing it.
Good. We'll put all that in the show notes and a link to your LinkedIn profile, because there's lots of great content on LinkedIn to follow as well. If you want
LinkedIn's
more
the place to
business
be.
cases and so on. So that's super helpful there. Thank you so much for coming, Alex. And thank you for helping the audience to become a little bit better at strategy.
I hope I did. Thanks a lot for having me. It was great.